This was actually designed to be the kind of thing that passes along certain social ideas and values and learning experiences to young people.
You're the live figures in this world of magic.
It's the greatest movie ever made.
Nobody has ever done anything like this before.
May the force be with you.
I shouted at Mark Hamill, my teeth flew out and hit him in the face.
Yoda is one of the wisest people in the universe.
I'm missing school. I'm purchasing my Star Wars tickets with my Star Trek credit card.
It was a film unlike anything you'd seen before.
It's all flooding back.
It's so funny to see me in that film.
When Star Wars opened in 40 cinemas across America in 1977, even its most enthusiastic supporters would have had to have possessed Yoda-like powers to predict that it would become the first part of the biggest film sensation ever. Something more than just a movie, closer to a religious and cultural phenomenon. In the intervening years, the Star Wars trilogy and its connected merchandising has grossed billions of dollars and made its creator, George Lucas, one of the richest and most powerful men in the movie business. It has made stars out of Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and Mark Hamill, as well as creatures like Chewbacca and droids like R2-D2. With the 1999 release of the first new Star Wars movie for 16 years, The Phantom Menace, the Force is with us once more. Despite having had a huge surprise success with American Graffiti, Lucas found it difficult to get studios to back Star Wars, or the big sci-fi space adventure Flash Gordon thing as it was called then. After failures with United Artists and Universal, Lucas got a deal from Alan Ladd Jr. at Fox. After constant development and at least 4 rewrites, he and Gary Kurtz, the producer of Star Wars, met with Charles Lippincott, an old film school classmate of Lucas.
They told me about the project and how far they were with Star Wars at the time and all that. And they said, do you want to read it? I said, sure, of course I want to read it. They said, here, take it and then come and tell us what you think of it. So I took it home that weekend, read it, and loved it. You know, I was a big Flash Gordon fan, which like George was, who had seen Flash Gordon and some of the other things. And so I said, this is great. This is always what I wanted to see on the screen.
Ah, I'll get it open. Keep an eye out, Dale.
George and I ended up, I think it was within that week, maybe a week later, one afternoon we bumped into each other in the Black Tower at Universal. And it was early afternoon. And George and I started talking. We ended up talking in the foyer for 3 hours about this and about George's dream to have 3 little stores to sell Star Wars merchandise, one in Los Angeles, one in San Francisco, and one in New York connected to a comic book shop he owned a part of in the Upper East Side. And, you know, it just grew from there. We would back and forth talk about this stuff.
With the script completed, casting got underway. Anthony Daniels was interviewed for the part of the droid, C-3PO.
When I went for the interview with George Lucas 20 years ago, I was warned that he's a very shy man and he may not say anything. Well, you may realize that a lot of actors are shy, so they make an effort. And I went in and I made an effort. Otherwise, we were going to have this terrific silence, clearly, for 2 minutes that he was seeing every actor. And he has this curious, vulnerable quality about him. He's a very dedicated businessman and filmmaker, but he has the quality that makes you want to help him. And he generally, I think, hires people that he thinks can do the job.
I had an interview, and I remember Irene or somebody telling me that I think George was marking us out of 10. Now, that may have been a myth, but I got a very high mark, and I got a very good part.
The actual making of Star Wars now has its own mythology. I mean, there are a collection of stories, some of which are true and some of which are far from true. I suppose the most famous one is that Harrison Ford was this humble carpenter sort of, building a doorway near where the auditions were going on, and George Lucas couldn't find the right man to play Han Solo. He was considering Christopher Walken, actually, the actor who made his name then in The Deer Hunter, and obviously has gone on to play many great psycho parts in Hollywood. Anyhow, and during a lunch break, he saw this character walking around with his carpenter's belt on, his hammer swinging from his side, and thought, there's my space cowboy. Of course, the reality is that Fred Roos, the casting director who'd worked with Lucas on his last film, American Graffiti, had deliberately hired Ford, who was a part-time carpenter, to be around because he really believed he should get the part. Lucas, on the other hand, was adamant that he didn't want anybody who'd been in American Graffiti to be in Star Wars. So that's been turned into this great myth that Ford was plucked from complete obscurity and stuck in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon.
Although Lucas was at first unconvinced about casting Harrison Ford, right from the outset, Harrison was convinced that Star Wars was a winner.
No, I thought it was special in that the characters that the three of us played, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and myself, the characters that we played had a very good story going. There was a sort of a story that I recognized and had heard before in other fairy tale forms. I thought that part of the movie would work well. It seemed to be a story well told. And then when you added on top of that all the effects and the which at that time were unique. Nobody had ever done anything like this before. I thought it would be a big hit.
Not everyone, however, had such a difficult route into the movie as Harrison Ford.
No audition whatsoever. It was just get down to the costumiers, get the costume made, and let's get working. And that was, literally 20 minutes, and it was all done and dusted.
Lucas took the creation of another universe and its creatures to a new level, and for the actors, it meant that their early experience of the movie was getting used to the problems that their costumes would cause.
Claustrophobic, and not very comfortable, to be honest, at first. But luckily, I've only got short arms, which helped. Had I got normal sort of long arms and muscly, there was no room at all to move in there.
One of the problems of this costume was that it was the first one ever made, really. I mean, it was based, let's face it, on Fritz Lang in Metropolis. But this one had to work. This one had to be able to walk. I never could go upstairs because just technically I couldn't. But I had George Lucas literally on his knees at my feet for months, working out how to make a knee work or an elbow work or whatever. This little model is very malleable, but the opposite was true in my case, and I had to make the most of what I could do, that I didn't have gestures beyond this line and whatever. And one of the reasons George wanted to see me for the part in the first place was that I was quite good at mime in those days, so I could take something really weird and possibly make it work. And then the sculpture of the face is very important. That is, it's beautiful enough in repose on its own, but you can actually animate it as a piece of mask work.
It's a mask. It's just a fur rug, basically. Mask would go on and the character would come out. I cannot explain it. It's weird. And if you look at that, you look at Chewie, there's a percentage of me in him and him in me.
The droids and creatures weren't the only ones who had problems with costume and makeup. Carrie Fisher was not happy with her appearance as Princess Leia.
They brought me out, they put this horrible hairstyle on me.
You're like, it's great.
And George said, do you like it? And I said, to put giant hair that extends out this way on someone with a round face is cruel.
Despite Fisher's hate of the hair, it became one of the most loved aspects of her character, copied by fans worldwide. In March 1976, filming began in the Tunisian Sahara, the location for Luke's desert home planet of Tatooine. The Hotel City Driss and the cave dwellings of Matmata became Mos Eisley Spaceport and Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's farmstead.
Well, my first day on the set was in Tunisia. It was after a number of days that we'd waited around in Jerba, in the motel in Jerba, having a ball. We had a fantastic horse rides up and down the beach, I remember. Crazy stuff to do before you start a film. I remember I was sharing a chalet beside Koo Stark, and that was kind of off-putting. Koo was just a young girl, but she was very attractive and intriguing. First day on the set was a hard day, because it was a long, hard scene, and George was a long way away. I think most of the communication was by down the earphones or through the first assistant.
On set, it can be slightly confusing, or it was for me, because apart from the words action and cut, he didn't really say too much, so I was kind of left guessing as to what he wanted. But I had enough people around the back telling me, you know, you're doing quite a good job, actually.
Maybe there was a slight gap in understanding, but I think he kind of left it up to us. Whether he got what he wanted, I don't know. But, I mean, as far as he was personable and very easy, he wasn't domineering and difficult.
It was while filming in Tunisia that Lucas's casting of Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi seemed to begin to blend with reality. Lucas said he plays a teacher, Luke's mentor, and that was mirrored in the way Mark Hamill reacted to him. Guinness is the Jedi of the actors.
Obviously, Guinness directed the thought, I think, in a way. You can't have somebody teaching with that depth of experience as an actor and then having those lines. Obviously, he set the tone for the thinking about it. The force is always there. You know, that force guides the film.
Anthony Daniels stunned everybody on set when he appeared as C-3PO with the fantastic gold cyborg costume shimmering in the desert sun. But inside, the suit was extremely uncomfortable, hot, and heavy.
Finally, we're in the desert, and I say my very first line was, my first job was programming binary load lifters very similar to evaporators in most respects. The only thing was I couldn't actually say it. I was so crazed by this suit, even though I knew the script very well. I said, my first job was cut, action. We did it 3 times. Finally, George came up to me and said, Tony, we can fix the voice later. Say anything. So in fact, in the first scene, I said, right, sir, my first job was ba-wah-wah-wah-wah-wah. Same length of sound, but rubbish. Well, says binary load lifters is rubbish. That's why I couldn't say it.
Hot, exhausted, and with restricted vision, C-3PO also had to act with the rest of the cast of humans, creatures, and droids.
The biggest problem was not that I couldn't see here, or here, or here, or here, but that my best friend, who was somewhere down here, blind person, you know, where is he? I can't find him. My best friend was down there, R2-D2 somewhere.
There was no room at all to move in there. And I just switched on the lights and moved the head around like this, and then wobbled the eye around. There's an eye on there that moves.
But he never spoke to me. I would say, where are you going? Then there would be this pause, and I would think of my next line. Well, I'd think of his line. He was saying, oh, what makes you think that a settlement's over there? Another pause. And I tried to get George, you know, couldn't George do, and he said, you know, he'd try. And we did it again, and he kind of went, R, beep, 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 beep. And it was terrible. So in the end, I just did it all by myself.
Meanwhile, Charles Lippincot's efforts to get merchandising deals also had some problems. He went with a Fox executive to one meeting with a prominent toy manufacturer, but it didn't help.
He said, I don't want to talk about Star Wars. Is that why this other guy's here? Get him out of here. I don't want him here. I don't want him even in our offices. And I got thrown physically out, pushed out of the place.
After 2.5 weeks filming in the heat of Tunisia, cast and crew arrived in England for 15 hot weeks at Elstree Studios.
Summer of '76 was just like the hottest summer in English history up until that time, or one of the record-breaking hot summers. And the fact that all those pilots had only their shirts on. I mean, they were in shorts and sandals, you know, attacking the Death Star. We laughed a lot.
Best fun I had was in the cockpit in Elstree.
We had to sell it with such sincerity, and yet on the face of it, it was just ludicrous.
They brought in a little toy for us to punch, so we'd have something to punch for our instrument panel.
You know, that Wookiee flying the spaceship, I mean...
The idea that we're zooming through space while sitting on a platform in Elstree.
It seems to me that we pretty much laughed nonstop.
Then we did things like where we'd swing across the chasm. I love that I'm talking about this like it was just yesterday. It's all flooding back. And there was a concern that we would swing across. We did a couple of those, and we would like strike the wall and slide to the floor.
R2-D2 is my best friend in the movie. He drove me nuts. He drove everybody nuts because usually, sometimes there was a little man inside, but normally it was either on a wire being pulled along, and then the wire would snap, or pulled along, it would fall over. Other times, there was a man poking it with a broomstick.
I couldn't keep up with the action because I just couldn't move the robot. It was heavy, and each leg only moved about 4 inches at a time. So that's when they developed remote control robots.
In one scene, in the Death Star control room, the door opened, zip, Sir Alec Guinness, me, Luke Skywalker, all ran in. But faster than ever came R2-D2. For the first time ever, he moved, boom, smashed into the control room, into the console. A road accident. I thought that was really good. But the radio controls, he would pick up the Air Force Base over there, the cab firm over here, or the sunspots or anything. So endlessly, you watch the movie, the number of times he's coming towards the camera, and he is clearly going to bang into this wall, but they cut.
When we were going to get our medals at the end of Star Wars, the assistant director, Tony Way, had a bullhorn. Toe the line, gentlemen, toe the line. And they were all lined up, you see. And we started to go down to get our medals. And these guys under their breath were like, I don't know if I can say it on TV. They were saying these rude, calling us names and stuff like that. And that got me really upset. I got to the end of the take, you know, and I said to Harrison, hey, these guys are all, you know, yanking our chain. You know, they're calling us names. Hey, kid, don't worry about it. Just shoot it. I said, no, that's not fair. I'm going to go talk to him. You're going to make it worse. No, I think I can talk to him. So I go over to all the guys that are lined up, and I said, did anyone tell you the story of what's going on here? No. I said, don't you realize you guys are like heroes of the galaxy, and you've saved the world and the universe, and you've, you know, destroyed this. And they sat rapt as I told them the story in all of 10 minutes. And of course, the very next take, they were totally into it. You know what I'm saying? Once you gave them a little chunk of the story and empowered them and made them a part of the experience rather than just a bunch of, you know, background. I mean, George had a million things on his mind. The last thing he was going to do is get a bullhorn and tell the whole story to 100 background artists.
Sometimes you work to a blue screen where there's nothing. All the ordinary actors, like, you know, say ordinary actors, I mean, like Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher and whoever, like human people, were on the set, and we were looking at a blue screen like that screen there behind you, and there was nothing there, but you had to imagine you were looking at something, like a spaceship travelling across, and you all had to look from left to right, and hopefully all looking at the same place at the same time. You know, things like that were hard to sort of create something out of nothing, really.
Magic. Editing. These movies, without an editor, are unwatchable.
Editing may have saved some scenes, but it killed others. Biggs' Star Gliders scene with Luke was destined to finish up on the cutting room floor.
What it is Biggs trying to convince Luke to go away and fight, or come to the academy, get off the farm, join the rebels.
There are many theories on why it was cut, but it seems most likely Alan Ladd Jr.'s offhand comment sealed its fate.
Alan Ladd, the producer, his first comment on seeing that whole Anchorhead sequence was, oh yeah, American graffiti in space. which may not have been the tone. Also, if you introduce Biggs at that point, what do you do with for the rest of the film? It's a very interesting scene. It's emotionally fulfilling in a way. It's a farewell to two friends. And suddenly to leave them until the end of the film is difficult, you know? I'm not embarrassed anymore thinking, well, maybe I was terrible in the scene. I don't think I was. And that's a great relief.
Although the edit meant the end of the line for Biggs, it meant new life for Anthony Daniels' voice.
George Lucas had written this story with a very different kind of robot in mind, a kind of, hey, you want to buy a used car, car, whatever. That kind of sleazy Bronx type voice. Unfortunately, he never told me that that's what he wanted, and I came in and kind of did my, I am C-3PO, human cyborg relations type British butler. Well, he didn't like it. He knew he could replace it, so he put up with me throughout the movie with a radio mic doing this whole performance. And after 6 months, found that actually other voices didn't really go with the physical characteristics of this very precise character. So he got me over to America, and the one thing he did ask me to do was to say the word schedule instead of schedule. So I wrote SK very big on my script.
Within Fox itself, there were many executives who didn't share Alan Ladd Jr.'s belief in the movie and felt that sci-fi and space travel were not themes that would appeal to audiences.
I think what it was the studio just wasn't as convinced as George Lucas was that this could be a really big hit. What they were really interested in was probably having him go on to make another American Graffiti.
For the most part, Fox had been very worried about the film. They'd even nearly shut the film down at one point.
The special effects team at Industrial Light and Magic managed to further upset the suits from Fox during the long, hot Californian summer.
We did this big wooden tub and we filled it with water, and people would bring shorts with them. And so when you get really hot, you'd put on your shorts and go and dip in this pool, big tank. And we were outside with a bunch of people doing that in the middle of the day when the studios people showed up one day. And the way it happened was they pulled into the parking lot, and they got part of the way in the parking lot, and then they backed out, and then they left. So one way or another, they didn't want to even get out of the car.
George actually, after we finished the mixes and before the film opened, had said to me, I think we're going to be real lucky if the film breaks even and does the same amount of business that 2001 did. And I said, I was pretty sure it would do that.
But Lucas was about to change everybody's mind and convince them of the power of his original vision.
We did a test screening at the Northport Theater in San Francisco in early May of '97. It was our screening by contract. The audience reaction was huge. It was just amazing. People were cheering. Some people that broke down. Alan Ladd Jr. broke down and cried.
When we were making it, we all thought, this is a bit sort of...
We all thought it was a load of rubbish when we were making it at first.
I mean, I've agreed to do it as a professional. I will carry out my contract, whatever. But these lines, these relationships, whatever, it was all a bit strange. And it was only George Lucas who obviously had the foresight to think, when I cut all this together, when it's edited, when the music's put on, the storyline will be clear and people may like it.
And then when it came out, of course, everybody was so surprised that it took off.
The strength of George Lucas's vision did have a downside, and although the movie was finished, it didn't necessarily mean that he was 100% satisfied with it.
When you finish a film, it sort of gets abandoned, and there's a lot of little things you haven't finished. Wait, I haven't painted this isn't done. And I say it came out, and everybody loved it, and in all the interviews at that point, I said, well, it isn't really what I wanted it to be. And
you even said that at the time?
Oh, every interview, any interview you read from me at that period, I'm
Really?
saying, it's only about 60% of what I wanted, and I'm disappointed, and everybody said, what is he talking about?
A terrific underground buzz was generated, ensuring a great reception when it finally opened across the USA. But all this passed Lucas by as he worked on finishing foreign dubs for the film.
I worked right up until the day it opened, and I was actually working. I forgot that the film was coming out when it came out. I was actually having.
Oh, now wait a minute.
I did. I mean, I was in a mixing studio mixing foreign dubs and trying to get the stuff, and was going to leave. I was trying to finish because I was going to leave the next day to go to Hawaii, and so I was having a hamburger. I was down here in Los Angeles actually finishing it, and I was having a hamburger in a restaurant, and I looked out the window, and there was a big crowd across the street. I said, what is this? And I walked out, and it was the Grauman Chinese, and it was Star Wars. And I'd literally forgotten that it was coming out that night, and that, you know, and that it was playing in that, because I didn't know what theaters it was playing in, so I was pretty shocked, actually.
Ever since Star Wars opened 6 weeks ago, cinema queues for it have been forming over half America, from early morning till late at night.
I saw Star Wars right here at the Chinese Theater in '77. It was actually quite by accident. I had missed a bus and I was on my way to Santa Barbara and had a few hours to spend. And what I mostly remember at first is that it cost me $3.50 to get in, and I just thought that was a just outrageous amount of money. But I went in and I'd never even heard of it. I was not a science fiction fan, didn't know anything about the film at all. I walked out of the theater and I wanted to stop people on the street and say, go, you have to go in there and see that movie.
The day it opened, it suddenly, there were lines around the block, the 40 theaters that have it, they were, you know, it was pandemonium.
And in New York, where I was at the time with Gary, I went down to the theater in midday, and there was a huge line getting out. And as I walked up to the theater, I saw these two Afro-American guys who were probably late teens come out of the theater with their programs and have this wonderful lightsaber fight in the street, which was just like, wow, great, fantastic.
Later, when Star Wars opened in Britain, it became an instant hit, with coach parties traveling to London to see the movie before its nationwide release.
It's the thing to do to go and see Star Wars, so we're all here doing the thing to do.
Fantastic, really good.
Oh, it was stupid. You want to be an 8-year-old to enjoy it. I liked all the monsters and how they placed it out in space.
It makes you laugh, it makes you feel like, you know, you want to get on and get at the baddies and all that.
The growing phenomenon was not just confined to the West. Even though it was yet to be released in Japan, people were taking extreme measures to get to see the movie.
I think it was around early July, we were told there was this great interest by Japanese tour buses stopping to see the movie. I thought that this is rather strange. You know, the movie won't open in Japan until like 6 months from now. What is this? And then, as the summer growed on, and I actually went down to the theater to see a tour bus stopping and letting off these nice middle-class tourists with cameras, the whole thing, going in there to see Star Wars. Pretty strange. Then I found out they were having Star Wars tours. Sign up, come to the United States, and see Star Wars. This is really heavy. In Japan, it is like still 3 months before the film. And it was Star Wars crazy. I mean, they were like beyond everything.
As the impact of Star Wars spread worldwide, it became clear there was something more going on than a response to a popular movie. It had become a cultural phenomenon.
It's the only film that's produced a cultural phenomenon.
I know certainly in my brief lifetime, I've never seen anything like it. It's more than a movie to people. It's like a way of life.
Well, it's not just a movie. Like, it's something that a lot of people can relate to.
It's a very positive message. It's very optimistic. It's about hope.
It's got great morals, and it's got a lot of heart.
We became aware of the fact that we had latched onto something and made something that went beyond. It was not an American star movie, but it was a movie that sort of spread out and made a statement to everybody.
Star Wars hits people on so many levels, and I see that from working on the magazine and the mail that people send me. And looking back as an adult, I can see how powerful the story was that kept me coming in. As a kid, it was all the surface flash, the explosions and the Wookiees and the creatures and the lightsabers. But as I got older, it's almost as though the movies became deeper and deeper, and the stories and the choices that they presented, and as silly as it sounds, you know, the choice between the light side and the dark side is a real choice that we all have to make.
There's a kind of fairy tale aspect to it that continues to be relevant to kids growing up. It's about maturity and about responsibility and a lot of the things that kids have to learn before they grow up.
This was actually designed to be the kind of thing that passes along certain social ideas and values and learning experiences to young people. It was meant to be that way. I mean, that was one of the ideas in me doing it in the first place. And I didn't, at the time, have any idea that how that would resonate, because you sort of say, well, mythology and that kind of stuff doesn't really relate today. But the one thing that this has proven to me is that it really does relate.
Before we know it, we're, realize that we believe Yoda is one of the wisest people in the universe, even though he's just this nutty little green puppet.
Nowadays you see special effects films and you wonder, who are we supposed to care about? And there it's so clear. We have a farm boy, we have a wizard, we have a princess, we have a pirate. There's such archetypes of classic fairy tales and mythology.
You wanted to follow them, and they were participating in this giant mythical struggle, and along the way we were dropping kind of Buddhist slogans that would guide you through life. I don't know whether they were Buddhist, but a lot of kids of that generation, kind of grew up with these mantras from Star Wars.
Do or do not, there is no try. They've become cliches, but it's such a good kind of guide for life. Do it. Don't just try to do something. Do something.
Star Wars itself is more of a family unit. It has this mythos that goes with it, and this mythos helps carry it out there, so that it's a story that can be told again and again. That when it was re-released a few years ago, you could take young kids to it, and young kids are going to love it just as much as when it was brand new.
There was this whole generation that grew up on these films as teenagers or younger. And those kids are grown up now, and a lot of them have their own kids. And so there's these, it sort of crosses generational lines.
It's almost a marker for us. I mean, the prior generation had Woodstock.
It's our childhood.
It's changed everything. It's changed youth culture from like 20 years ago. Everybody knows Star Wars. It is youth culture.
I think there's so much in Luke that every young person can identify with it, and that we can even identify with, because we can look back and see all the mistaken opportunities we didn't, the opportunities we didn't take.
And we all long for an Obi-Wan Kenobi to tell us
absolutely. I mean, I'm still looking for him.
That there is a force.
Exactly. Yeah. And the yearnings of Luke are so deeply rooted.
A boy who breaks out of his daily, desolate, bleak existence, takes a chance and saves the galaxy, but also saves himself and makes a life for himself that he can be proud of. And I think that appeals to so many people.
I mean, the film struck a note in Japan as well as here, because it spoke of many of the same basic feelings and concepts that young people are into and you grow up with, and that some adults carry with them.
At the heart of all this is ancient mythology that's been around for thousands of years. Mythology is kind of a psychological archaeology. You can look into the past and look into the minds of people in the past and see what their emotional life was like and what they cared about. And I just translated that into a modern story.
Academic Joseph Campbell had written an influential study of the stories and heroes of mythology. He stated that these stories and characters had a deep and timeless resonance within all peoples across the world.
He used a lot of standard works on mythology. Joseph Campbell's book, Heroes, A Thousand Faces. Read a lot of Japanese culture, all sorts of Mexican influences in there as well.
It's a good story as well, it's all quite medieval, but with high-tech sort of weapons and that.
The impact of the mythological power of the Star Wars trilogy was heightened by the efforts to make its whole world, its people, and technology appear real. Specialists were brought in to make sure things seemed authentic.
The English costume designer, John Mallow, was hired for a very specific reason. His family was probably the most important family, at least in the English language world, regarding costumes of war. Historically, they had always been involved in dealing with this. And so John's involvement was as a historian from the beginning, who then came on to treat all this material and to make it more real.
Most sci-fi films, as we know, the ships are so pristine and clean and nice, and everything is so orderly and perfect. But in the Star Wars universe, you have to hit the Millennium Falcon to get it to start. And people don't always get along the way they're supposed to, and it has a very real feeling as though this is what it would be like if you and I were out there in this situation.
The search for realism wasn't just a design concern, and although the adventure takes place in a galaxy far away, Luke's story seems somehow familiar.
Star Wars is George Lucas. I mean, the two things are one and the same.
Star Wars is a very personal, especially the first one, a very personal film for George Lucas, and he did take aspects of his own life, his growing up in small town Modesto, far away from, all the action. Same as Luke in this planet of Tatooine out in the middle of nowhere in the galaxy.
Luke Skywalker. Luke was his nickname was Lucas's nickname as a child at Downey High School in Modesto.
It appeals to so many kids who feel like my parents or guardians aren't letting me really fly to my full potential.
Modesto back then was a small town, very safe, very quiet, rural community, farm, agriculture kind of community, still is agriculture. And this was small town living, and he refers to it as kind of like growing up in the Midwest, which as opposed to, people think of California, beaches and surfing. That's not what Modesto was. Modesto was a farm town.
We've lived at this residence since 1946, which is directly across the street from the home where George Lucas was born and raised. His room was completely loaded with art that young George drew, and that was his passion. At that time already, he had been working and drafting and making these pictures that were sort of similar to Star Wars, shall we say. At that time, he must have had some ideas already of what he was going to do in the future.
This is the alley between Ramona Avenue and El Cajon. From what I understand, this is where he and his friends used to play as a child in the 1950s. This was a pretty typical middle-class neighborhood for Modesto. Modesto was a small town then, about 20,000 people. And the children would, rather than play in the front yards, would play in the backyards, which connected here in the alley. They did all kinds of wonderful things back here. Lucas says this is where he made his first movie, which was using a friend's movie camera.
We decided we were going to put together this little war scene, and in his yard, he, in the open area where the flower bed had been, we dug out a area that flattened it and made little roads and stuff, and we had these toys, and so we decided to make a movie of it. He said, well, why don't we make a movie of this? By using a Bell & Howell camera, old 8mm my parents had, we used to click it, and with the stop action, create an effect of the toys moving around, and then we even lit fires and stuff, and things blew up. Probably one of the first films he ever made, but it was very critical to him. Everything looked right. That I can remember, because now that wouldn't look right. It doesn't look real, So, I mean, back then it was, who knew that this was going to come out like this?
They also would do things like haunted houses.
We used my parents' garage, and things would drop out of the loft, and we had colored lights, strobe light type things that we put together. And we were charging, I don't know, nickel a dime, I can't remember exactly what it was. And kids were coming to see this. Well, the crowd started to drop off. When I say crowds, the line of kids we had, big thing in the summer. Not much going on, dog days of summer, as they call them. And George, well, we got to change it around so it's different. So he worked hard, in a couple of days he changed it around. Then we had the new and improved fun house that we did. The kids came back, and then he kept doing it. And he did this three times. I marveled at it, because as soon as sales would fall off, George would go back and redo it, retweak it, and the kids would come back again.
We all thought that was so funny because that's kind of what he did with Star Wars when he came out with a special edition, changed a few things and got us all to come back and see it again.
Back in Modesto, the young Lucas surprised his childhood friends with his clear-cut views on the cinema experience.
I think it was '54. The movie came out from Walt Disney called Forbidden Planet. We went there for George's birthday, and he was really taken with this, as we all were. All the kids our age were really taken with it, and it was kind of interesting. We were all up in the Logis section of the State Theater, which was a nice theater in town at that time. He said, "This is where you enjoy the movie." He said, "No, we're going to sit here." He said, "Because it looks better up here." We didn't, most of the other guys didn't care. We can sit downstairs rather than make a deal out of it. But he wanted the full effect of the movies.
Forbidden Planet, where Robbie the robot plays, and the last member of a vanished civilization takes you deep down into his planet's heart to see the miraculous marvels of a race of geniuses.
Don't be afraid. 7,800 levels.
Lives of anyone who invades his domain. Welcome to the world of Morbius and his planet of mystery. Welcome to the Forbidden Planet.
He would study things, and no matter what it was he tackled, he would learn it, master it. And we used to go to the races, automobile races over at Laguna Seca, and I can still remember going over there a couple times, and he was getting certain things out of it. We were just enjoying the moment. He was learning it.
He had this accident, you know, he wasn't at our class graduation because his car he had a bad accident.
A lot of people have heard about this automobile accident, but from my perspective, it was devastating. I thought I was going to lose a fellow I'd known for a long time because the word was out he wasn't going to make it.
That seems to have been a turning point when he reached some decisions about what he was going to do, and he went down south to the film school.
I think he became quieter, from what I could see, and more intense.
He had to leave if he was going to do the film, and I think once he knew that that was what he wanted to do, he had focus.
Being the protagonist in a fairy tale is sometimes one of the less interesting characters. You know, Darth Vader and C-3PO are much more interesting, as is the Cowardly Lion and the Wicked Witch, as opposed to Dorothy. Yeah. Gender aside, I think it's a good analogy.
It certainly seemed like the characters that made the most impact were those purely from Lucas's imagination. It was Darth Vader, C-3PO, and R2-D2 that got the Hollywood honor of their footprints outside man's Chinese theater.
Every character in that movie, or in those first three movies, is so original and so striking, and yet feels so right and so natural in some way. And I can't put my finger on it exactly, but look at Chewbacca, look at Darth Vader. These are the, how does he think of these names even? And yet something about them sounds right in your mind. They sound lyrical. When I hear other people try to come up with Star Wars style names, they sound cheesy and corny. This Chewbacca with his, he was like a dog. He was based on Lucas's dog, and he has a lot of the qualities of dogs that we love. But he can also fly a spaceship. You know, Boba Fett has the mystery of who is the man behind the mask.
Irving Kershner said he's very cool, very slow, but he's also very quick. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound quite right. What does he mean he's slow and quick? But it was the best note you could get from a director, because Boba Fett is, the least you do, the better. And if you see him waving a gun around saying, I'm going to kill, you know, it's, so you just, nothing. So he moves in that sort of way, cradling the gun. And I thought one of the first days that about Clint Eastwood in A Fistful of Dollars. If you remember him, he was a bounty hunter. And everything was done in sort of the typical Sergio Leone, moody Western, where everyone's speaking in a different language. But such great films. Clint Clint Eastwood doing this, and you can imagine a Clint Eastwood underneath the helmet, even with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Cool. When he needs to be quick, he's there, bang. The other thing that reminds me of, or with Boba Fett, is The Exorcist. If people remember the film, Linda Blair, who her head could turn round. And I don't know why I thought of that. I always thought that something's going on over here, and he can go very slowly. He can almost turn his peripheral vision. He's aware of everything that's going on.
One of the difficult things I've had, times I've had in the past, is that most of the characters have had to been made out of rubber. They're latex. The best performance I was able to get was out of Yoda, and it was because I had a genius like Frank Oz to be the puppeteer in that. But it's very hard to direct around a large rubber thing that can't move very well.
Jabba was odd insofar as there would be this gigantic thing that would be moving around, and his lips would be moving, and his tongue would be flapping back and forth, and his arm would be moving, and his eyes would be rolling. But his lines were read by somebody off stage, so you get this rather squeaky little voice saying things like, "It's an old Jedi mind trick," and this gigantic monster moving around. But the funniest thing was at the end of the take, when they shouted, "Cut! All right, lads, get out!" You know, if it was going to be a while and the guys inside could get out. Jabba would deflate like a balloon. He'd just go and become like a pile. He'd just become a pile of rubber, which is all he was.
A few times I'd get up next to Jabba the Hutt and start giggling because you saw this huge, it was a wonderful creation. Whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And he rehearsed his lines, Jabba, just like an ordinary actor. You know, you would see them doing whatever they were going to do for the next line or the next reaction, and they'd be doing it. You know, you see actors standing in the corner going over the lines. You know, and Jabba was doing the same. So it was quite amusing to watch Jabba rehearse.
You'd be acting with a droid, which is one of the bounty hunters was IG-88, which is this tall, thin droid, which people have asked me, what was it like working with IG-88? And I said, very boring. Well, why? I said, we didn't say much. You know, not very good at conversation. Really? I mean, does he live in America? I thought, oh dear.
It's no surprise that the Star Wars universe is sometimes confusing. Behind the masks, however, things were not always as you might imagine. Baker remembers how jokers on the set used to paste pictures of topless models inside R2.
Somewhere along the line, the electrics, all of those characters that were on the lighting guys, were real characters, are funny blokes, you know, London, all Londoners mostly, and yeah, they put page 3 pictures inside the dome of the robot, but it was too close to me. I was going cross-eyed like that inside the robot.
In the piece where I climb up into Slave 1, when I say, "Put Captain Solo in the cargo hold," I always remember that line, and Irving Kershner saying, "Are you ready, Boba?" He always used to call me Boba. And there's Captain Solo's going up in. They say, "Okay, action." So I, mask on. "Put Captain Cargo in the Solo." I've said the wrong line, you see. "Put Captain Cargo in the Solo." But luckily, no one can hear what you're saying. So immediately after the take, Irving Kershner said, "Okay, Boba, you said the line." I said, "Yep, okay." No one can hear you. And in fact, I said the wrong line, but when it's dubbed on afterwards, it fits the same thing. So even with the few lines you have, you can make a mistake under the mask. And I got away with it.
Because people were wearing these weird costumes, and because I couldn't see, the whole time actors were getting lost, or were turning and walking the wrong way. And it's just very funny to see that. Particularly when you see a Garmorian guard walking into the set and bouncing off it. There's something quite hilarious about that. Some people work almost to the point of passing out. They couldn't get oxygen into their lungs through the mask or whatever. The Garmorian guards, whenever they finished their take, they would jam their mouths open. Girls would stand around with these little portable fans and blow air through the mouth onto the face of the actors inside. There was a day when I got an itch on my head. That skull was polyurethane. Now, my head would itch every day, but you just have to put up with it. But I mean, this was the day when I got a real itch. One of those ones that you hear about various tortures and how at the end of it all you give everything away, including your kids. But I bore this for about 6 hours. And in the end, I couldn't stand it. I went up to David Tomlin, the first assistant, and he turned around, he saw me, and it must have been in my voice. I just said, "David, I've got an itch." And he stopped everything and called Nick Dudman, and I was led back off to the dressing room, and Nick split the skull open with a knife. And I mean, he just hit it with a kind of cleaver. It was terrifying. I thought he was going to chop my head open. And I was able to scratch my head. And they sent me home that day. They said, "Well, there's nothing more we can do. You know, the skull's ruined. We've got to make another one." And the next day I came back in, and Nick had made a skull with a hinge in it. So if it ever happened again, he could actually open up the skull and scratch my head. And of course, it never happened again.
Darth Vader is an unforgettable creation, yet in the trilogy, he is the product of more than one person.
Darth Vader was a wonderful, wonderful conglomeration of people, because you know James Earl Jones did the voice, David Prowse was in the costume, and some fantastic British stunt people did all of his sword fighting.
Nobody will ever forget Darth Vader, and here we are, like 20 years later, still traveling around the world on the back of Darth Vader.
How did you prepare for Darth Vader?
Not at all, not at all. I mean, you see, the thing, I've always been what I call a physical actor.
When Dave comes up to you and says, "No disintegrations," there's this sort of West Country accent, so you can giggle underneath. So we said our lines to each other in the scenes that we had. And of course we knew before that James Earl Jones did the voice, and that is one of the greatest set of tubes for a voice you could ever wish for. And it does suit the Darth Vader character, there's no question about it.
Working on 3 successful movies over nearly 10 years, the leading actors formed a strong bond, which newcomers could easily recognize.
They were like a family. They were very much a family. They were in it for, you know, the full 15 rounds, whereas the rest of us were simply visitors. We were sort of guests at Casa Star Wars, as it were.
I didn't have much to do with Harrison Ford, only the carbon freezing chamber where he goes down into the carbonite and off he goes. But he's very charming, and every morning he'd say, "Hi, you know, is the costume hot?" And I said, "Yeah, it is pretty hot." I said, "It's the jetpack that weighs." He said, "Well, at least I've just got the shirt and the trousers and the gun, that's it." You know. I said, "Well, yeah, well, you're lucky."
Harrison arrived late. Harrison is quite shy, he keeps himself to himself. So he just got on with the job. He was like, you know, he's a carpenter. He was a bit like a carpenter, turning up and just getting on with the job.
Closeness is one thing, but when it came down to kissing Leia for the first time, Harrison Ford was less than passionate.
He's not a big fan of the love scene. So it's not like this great day where they say, "Cut, cut, cut," and we're still, you know, snogging in space, which was the other title they considered, but they had to drop it out for the children.
There are 2 points of view on Lucas and the strength of his vision. One sees him as a perfectionist, striving to realize the movie in his head. The other is to see him as an obsessive control freak.
I think that George Lucas is very much a fan of controlling his own projects.
I suppose the irony now is that Lucas is the all-powerful head of this this empire that he's created.
His determination to acquire that level of control grew more and more strong as his first couple films were kind of taken away from him by the studio and re-edited. The famous deal of him, you know, lessening his fee on Star Wars in exchange for control over any possible sequels and any other spin-off items that might come out of it.
There are those who say that he's now an obsessive, control-freaky sort of character. Nothing gets past him, nothing goes into any of his movies without his say-so. But he's always been that way.
I think he's an artist, and nobody would suggest that you know, Da Vinci should have let somebody else come in and paint a hat on the Mona Lisa. And I think that the fans wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, I don't think that Star Wars fans want a Star Wars movie that isn't controlled by George Lucas. What's the point?
That secrecy is a priority for the production team is no surprise, and the care starts right from the point of casting. Mike Carter was asked if he wanted a part in a sci-fi movie called Blue Harvest.
I said, "Well, you know, what is it? You know, I need to know more. I mean, I'm not going to just turn up and play some old tap." So he said, well, in principle, would you like the job? It's probably going to be about 5 weeks' work. And I thought, yeah, okay, you know, I wasn't all that particularly impressed. And then he sat me down and said, okay, I'll tell you what it's about. It's not called Blue Harvest, it's called Revenge of the Jedi. So he said, okay, you mustn't tell anybody. It's the third Star Wars film. You mustn't tell a soul. So I went straight home and told my kids, you know, and then said to them, don't tell anyone. And then one day my daughter came home and was in tears. And I said, what's the matter, Hannah? She was only about 6 or 7. And she said, I couldn't help it. I just had to tell my best friend you were going to do the next Star Wars film. She was terrified that the George Lucas police were going to come round and get her.
The biggest threat for me, I guess, is the fact that I know my character didn't die in this one, so there's a possibility I could be in the next 2. So if that's something that's over my head that prevents me from talking about that one, then okay. But honestly, I don't know anything about the first one. I mean, I worked on it for 3 days. When I got there, George gave me the 6 pages I was in. I have no idea what happened before or what happened after. So I couldn't talk about it even if I wanted to.
When a Star Wars movie is being made, photographers will go to huge lengths to get a picture, and the team will do equally bizarre things to stop them. Early in the shoot for Jedi, Bib Fortuna had to get from makeup to the set for a lighting test.
They were terrified that there'd be somebody on Bournemouth High Street with a 2000mm lens who would see me momentarily pass in between 2 walls and take a photograph of me and say, this is one of the new Star Wars creatures. So they agreed that I could walk up, but they asked if I would mind wearing a dustbin bag on my head. So my first public appearance as Bib Fortuna was as a mobile dustbin bag. And I wore this dustbin bag, this black plastic bag over my head. I was led up to the studio. I was led into the studio. It was taken off. I did the lighting test. It was finished. Back in the bag. Walked back down the front and got the makeup taken off.
Now that the prequels are a reality, virtually everyone from the original trilogy is keen to get into the new films, and the fans are just as keen to see them.
We hear that Boba Fett will appear in episode 2. What form will he be in? Will he be 25, unmasked? Even with technology and plastic surgery, I don't think I could be 25 again. Although, I mean, ideally, if it was my choice, I would like my son Robbie, who was in Robin of Sherwood, I'd like him to play Boba Fett. He looks just like me. He's tall, he's very fit. And he would be ideal. Keep it in the family.
One of the reasons Star Wars was successful is that it took you back to the original days of the cinema when you were seeing things that your imagination could never have prepared you for. The problem now is that, you know, we all, certainly the people who are into the whole Star Wars thing, they know this universe inside out. Is there anything left that can surprise them? I'm sure there are going to be some great set pieces, some great looking scenes, some interesting new characters and creatures, and some very exciting moments within this film. But I just don't think it's possible that it can take that leap of the imagination that Star Wars did originally.
The big advance, which would compare, I guess, with being able to free spaceships up to be able to pan with them, is that I've got digital characters that can actually walk and talk with live action characters and do a performance.
We've developed virtual set technology and virtual set software which allows us to create really complex environments totally digitally. Things that we could only dream about 3 or 4 years ago we're able to achieve now for a very low price, which we're extremely happy about. But mostly and primarily most of the technology is going into character animation.
We did some experimentation with Jabba the Hutt in the special edition to make sure that we could pull this off. It's probably the first film to have fully integrated digital characters who can act.
On the new movie, the character of Jar Jar, who was the computer animated character, or the lead computer animated character, and apparently went for months and months before Lucas would approve a design. He knew what the character was going to be like in terms of its personality, but its appearance was a subject of mystery and continual effort for the artists. And Terrell Whitlatch is the artist who designed Jar Jar, and she kept trying and coming up with new designs, and no, George Lucas didn't apparently, perfectly like any of them. And then he spotted a doodle that she had done, just a little drawing she had made on a film years back and put up on her bulletin board, and it was a little creature with big eyes sticking up on stalks, and he went, that's Jar Jar. Not that exact picture, but that's the essence of the character. And from that little drawing on her bulletin board sprang this whole character.
I'm so loyal to George, and I owe him so much. He at one time said, would you consider playing an Obi-Wan type character handing Excalibur down to the next generation? I said, when would that be? And at the time he said around 2011. I thought, gee, as much as I'd like to have a job lined up at the turn of the century, I was figuring out how old I'd be at that point, and I thought, well, I don't know.
Only 3 people from the original movie went into the first one. Kenny Baker, who plays R2-D2, then Warwick Davis came in to do like a little cameo role. George offered him a little cameo role, and Ian McDiarmid, who played the Emperor, he went in to play Senator Palpatine. Excuse me. But they were the only 3 from the original. I'm just hoping that when they come around to do an episode 2 and episode 3, that Darth Vader will reappear, and I get asked to reprise the role.
It was for Star Wars fans as though another chapter of the Bible was being beamed down from heaven, and in that way, as sacrilegious as that sounds, it's kind of true because it's the real thing. It's coming from the real source, and so I think people are inclined to let it seep into them, and then it's just up to the film as to whether it's as amazing as the other 3, and it looks like it's going to be.